He thought he had everything, a beautiful mansion, a loving new wife, and 2 perfect little boys. But when he came home early one afternoon, what he saw in his own kitchen shattered his world. His sons were crying on the floor, begging not to eat spoiled food. And the woman he trusted most was standing over them with cruelty in her eyes. That was the moment the millionaire's heart broke and his soul awakened. The sky over Fairfield County, Connecticut, was washed in gold that Thursday afternoon, the kind of warm light that made everything look serene, even when darkness was quietly gathering inside the walls of a perfect mansion. Daniel Whitmore's black Tesla eased into the circular driveway of his estate, 40 acres of sculpted lawns, fountains, and white columns that gleamed like marble bones under the sun. For years, Daniel had built an empire of luxury real estate, selling homes like this to the world's elite. But the one he kept for himself was his pride, a glass and stone dream where success and family were supposed to coexist in peace. He came home early that day. The deal in Boston had gone better than expected, and he wanted to surprise his wife, Victoria. Maybe they'd open a bottle of wine, laugh a little, and have dinner together with their 4-year-old twin boys, Ethan and Noah. It had been weeks since he'd seen them. As he entered the foyer, the faint smell of perfume and roasted salmon drifted through the air. The house was quiet, too quiet. Usually he'd hear laughter, the patter of small feet, the soft sound of cartoon voices coming from the living room. But this time, nothing, only silence, heavy and wrong. He followed the scent into the kitchen and stopped dead in the doorway. On the marble floor, his sons were crouched side by side like frightened animals. Their pajamas were filthy, their hair tangled, faces streaked with tears. In front of them were 2 old metal dog bowls filled with spoiled food, grey, crusted, crawling with tiny worms. The twins were trying to eat it. For a moment, Daniel thought he was dreaming. Standing over them was Victoria, his wife. His polished, elegant socialite wife, dressed in a $3,000 crimson gown. Heels clicking sharply on the tiles, she held a wine glass in one manicured hand and screamed down at the children, "Eat! You should be grateful you even have food. Stop whining like animals!" Ethan whimpered, "It smells bad, Mommy. Well, please." Victoria's voice cut through the air like a whip. "You'll eat what I give you. You're nothing but spoiled brats." She kicked one of the bowls toward them, splattering rotten bits across the floor. Daniel's heart stuttered. His throat burned. His brain screamed to move, to stop this, but his body was paralyzed. For years, he had trusted her with his life, his children, his home. And now the woman he thought was their protector was torturing them right under his roof. The kitchen, his perfectly designed sunlit kitchen, looked like a nightmare. The white marble was stained. The air stank of decay. On the counter lay Victoria's half-eaten lunch, grilled salmon, asparagus, and imported wine. She had fed herself like royalty and fed his children garbage. Ethan lifted his head weakly and saw his father. "Daddy!" he whispered. His small voice cracked in disbelief. Victoria spun around so fast her wine spilled onto the floor. Her perfect smile faltered, color draining from her face. "Daniel, you're home early." "I can explain." He didn't hear her. He rushed forward, scooping Ethan and Noah into his arms. Their bodies felt frighteningly light. Their skin was clammy. He could smell urine, old sweat, and something sour. They clung to him like they hadn't seen safety in weeks. Noah buried his face in Daniel's shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. "Daddy, she said you don't love us. She said you left because we're ugly and bad." Daniel froze. The words sliced through him like glass. He turned his gaze on Victoria, cold, disbelieving, furious. "What did you just say to them?" Victoria's painted lips trembled. "Daniel, they're lying. You know how dramatic kids can be. They spilled food on the floor and I— Don't!" His voice was low, trembling with barely contained rage. "Don't you dare!" He looked down and noticed bruises, faint but real, on Noah's thin wrists shaped like fingers. Ethan's knees were scraped raw. The children were shivering, even though the house was warm. Daniel's vision blurred. The world seemed to tilt. "How long has this been happening?" Victoria crossed her arms defensively, her tone turning cold. You don't understand what it's like. They cry all the time. They don't listen. I was just trying to discipline them. Discipline, Daniel whispered. You starved them. Ethan clutched his father's sleeve. His voice was tiny. She locks us in the basement, Daddy. When we cry, the word basement hit Daniel like a hammer. That room was dark, damp, filled with machines and the humming of pool filters. He could barely stand being in it himself. The thought of his sons trapped there made bile rise in his throat. He rose to his full height, holding his children close. Go pack your things, he said to Victoria, his tone eerily calm. You have 1 hour to leave this house. Victoria's face twisted. Daniel, you can't do this. I'm your wife. You'll regret, but he was already walking away. The twins clung to him tighter, their tears soaking his shirt. As he carried them upstairs, he whispered against their hair, You're safe now. I'm here. I promise she'll never touch you again. Downstairs, Victoria's screams echoed like the wails of a ghost. But Daniel didn't turn back. He knew this was only the beginning of a nightmare that had just started to reveal its true face. The following morning dawned grey and silent over the Whitmore estate. The sunlight crept through the wide glass windows, illuminating a scene that no longer felt like a home, more like the hollow shell of one. Daniel hadn't slept all night. He sat on the edge of the twin boys' bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes, watching them sleep with the kind of vigilance only a man haunted by guilt could know. Ethan's small hand rested over his brother's chest, as if to protect him even in dreams. Every few minutes Noah whimpered softly, the echo of fear still alive somewhere deep inside his tiny frame. Carmen Alvarez, the family's longtime housekeeper, arrived at 7 sharp, as she did every morning. She was a kind, middle-aged woman who had been with the Whitmores since the boys were born. When she saw Daniel sitting there, pale and exhausted, she froze. Mr. Whitmore, she began, but her words faltered as she caught sight of the children. Their faces were gaunt, their pajamas filthy. Her hand went to her mouth in horror. Dios mío. What happened to the babies? Daniel turned toward her slowly. His eyes were bloodshot, voice low. You tell me, Carmen, her brow furrowed. Sir? He rose, motioning her to follow. Down the staircase, across the marble floor, and into the kitchen, where the previous night's horror still lingered. The overturned dog bowls, the stench of rot, the wine stain on the floor like a blood trail. Carmen gasped, clutching the counter for balance. Senor, I don't understand. You worked here every day, Daniel said, his voice trembling between anger and pain. How long has this been going on? Tears welled in her eyes. She would send me home early whenever you traveled, saying she wanted to spend private time with the boys. I thought she was bonding with them. Sometimes when I came back they looked tired, quiet. I asked, but she always said they'd been playing outside too long. Daniel exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. She planned it. Every detail. Carmen wiped her eyes with her apron, guilt etched deep into her face. Senor, I should have known. I should have said something. Those poor little angels. He looked away, fists clenched. She's gone now. But this isn't over. At that moment, Ethan appeared at the doorway, his blonde hair sticking up, eyes half open. Daddy, I'm hungry. Daniel's expression broke. He lifted his son into his arms. You'll never be hungry again, buddy. I promise. He called his private physician, Dr. Ryan Hale, a long-time friend, who arrived an hour later. After examining the boys, the doctor's face turned grim. Daniel, they're severely malnourished. Bruises, old and new. Psychological trauma, too. I'll arrange for a child psychologist immediately. When Dr. Hale left, Daniel sat by the kitchen window, staring at the garden where Victoria used to host elegant brunches for her socialite friends. He saw now how fake it all was, the laughter, the compliments, the photos of her in designer dresses holding the boys as if they were accessories. He poured himself a glass of water, his hand shaking so badly he almost dropped it. His phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Victoria. Victoria, we need to talk. You misunderstood everything. I love those kids like my own. Please don't make this ugly. Daniel stared at the message for a long moment. Then he deleted it. By afternoon, he'd made several calls. one to his attorney, another to a private investigator, and a third to a journalist friend who owed him a favor. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. This was about justice, but even as he made those plans, he couldn't escape the gnawing question that had taken root in his mind. How did I not see it? That evening, as he tucked Ethan and Noah into freshly changed sheets, Noah asked quietly, "Daddy, is she coming back?" Daniel paused, brushing the boy's hair from his forehead. "No, sweetheart. She's gone for good." Ethan, who had been silent all day, finally spoke. "She said Mommy died because of us. Because we were bad." Daniel's chest constricted painfully. He took both their hands and spoke softly but firmly. "Listen to me. Your mother, your real mother, loved you more than anything. Her death wasn't your fault. It was an accident. You hear me?" Both boys nodded, though their eyes still carried doubt. After they drifted to sleep, Daniel went downstairs again. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and opened the safe in his office. Inside were photos, one of him and his late wife Emily, taken years ago by the lake. Her eyes had been kind, her laughter the kind that filled a room. He stared at the photo until his own reflection blurred. "I failed them, Em," he whispered. "But I won't fail them again." Just then the intercom chimed. Carmen's trembling voice came through. "Mr. Whitmore, there's someone at the gate. It's her." Daniel's blood ran cold. He went to the window, and there she was, Victoria, standing in the rain, dressed in black, sunglasses hiding her face, her posture defiant even now. A sleek car idled behind her, engine humming like a beast waiting to strike. "Open the gate, Daniel." Her voice crackled through the speaker, loud and desperate. "You don't understand, they're turning you against me." He stared at her face on the monitor for several long seconds. The same face that had once smiled at him over champagne, that he had once kissed goodnight. Now all he saw was a mask. He pressed the button and spoke with quiet finality. "If you ever come near my children again, I'll destroy you." Then he cut the intercom and turned away. As Victoria's fists pounded on the iron gate, her screams fading into the storm outside. That night, for the first time, Daniel understood what true evil looked like. Not in monsters or strangers, but in someone you once let hold your children's hands. And deep inside, a new vow took root, one colder and more dangerous than grief. Victoria Whitmore had just made the worst mistake of her life. 2 days passed, but the storm that had begun inside Daniel Whitmore's home showed no sign of calming. Outside, the skies over Connecticut had cleared, but inside the mansion, a tension still hung thick as fog. Daniel spent those days in silence, moving like a man whose entire reality had been split in two. He had always believed that evil came from the outside, from strangers, from distant dangers. Never from the woman who slept beside him, shared his meals, and tucked his sons into bed. Now that illusion had died, and something new was taking its place. A grim, determined resolve. Victoria hadn't stopped trying to reach him. Her messages arrived every few hours, pleading, apologizing, threatening. "Daniel, you're ruining everything." "I can explain. You'll regret this." "I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of father you really are. The boys are lying to get attention." "You know how kids are." He didn't reply to a single one. Instead, he met with his lawyer, Robert Keller. A man with sharp eyes, a cold manner, and a reputation for annihilating opponents in court. They sat in Daniel's study, surrounded by mahogany walls and old books. The smell of cigar smoke faint in the air. Keller flipped through the file Daniel had handed him. Photos, medical reports, notes from the doctor and housekeeper. After a long silence, he looked up. "And this isn't just abuse," he said flatly. "It's calculated cruelty. She's going to prison." Daniel leaned back, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "I don't want her in prison," he said slowly. "I want her to disappear. I want her to feel what my boys felt." Keller studied him carefully. "Then you'll need more than a lawyer." That night, Daniel called a name he hadn't spoken in years. Marcus O'Neill, a former military intelligence officer turned private investigator. They had worked together once during a real estate fraud case. And Daniel knew Marcus wasn't bound by the same moral limits as most people. Marcus arrived the next morning in a black SUV, carrying a small metal briefcase and an expression that could have been carved from granite. "You said it's personal," he murmured, stepping into the study. "Tell me everything." By the time Daniel finished recounting what had happened, every bruise, every scream, every lie, Marcus's jaw was set tight. "You want her life destroyed? I can do that. I want her truth exposed," Daniel said. "I want to know who she really is, where she came from, what else she's done." Marcus nodded once. "Consider it done." Over the next few days, the mansion became a command center. Marcus and his team of digital forensics experts tore through Victoria's past. Phone records, bank statements, old social media accounts, even her medical history. What they found made Daniel's stomach turn. Victoria wasn't her real name. Her birth certificate showed a different identity. Melissa Crane, born in Nevada with a criminal record sealed when she was 17. She had changed her name a decade earlier after being accused of elder neglect while working as a live-in caregiver for a retired judge's wife. "She's done this before," Marcus said grimly, dropping a stack of photos on the desk. "Different families, different cities, same pattern. Charm, manipulation, then cruelty behind closed doors." Daniel stared at the photos. Other houses, other smiling husbands, other children. The woman in every picture wore the same mask. Kind eyes, gentle smile, hands resting on someone else's child. "How many?" He whispered. "5 confirmed. 2 ongoing investigations." Daniel stood up, pacing the room, his fists clenched. "She's a predator, and she's been hiding in plain sight." Meanwhile, upstairs, Ethan and Noah were beginning to heal. Slowly, cautiously. Carmen stayed close to them at all times, reading stories, cooking warm meals, bringing a sense of safety back into the house. But their trauma ran deep. Some nights, Ethan would wake up screaming, convinced Victoria was hiding in the closet. Other times, Noah would refuse to eat unless Daniel tasted the food first. The boys clung to him constantly, when he went to shower, when he sat to work, even when he tried to sleep. Daniel didn't complain. He welcomed their closeness like penance for his blindness. Each time he looked into their faces, he saw what he had almost lost. 3 days later, Marcus returned with more findings, and this time, what he brought wasn't just disturbing. It was horrifying. He placed a small hard drive on the desk. "We cracked her laptop," he said quietly. "You need to see this yourself." Daniel plugged it into his computer. Dozens of folders appeared, each labeled with a date. Inside them, hundreds of photos and videos. The first few showed the boys crying dirty in the basement, flinching from shadows. But it got worse. There were audio recordings too. Victoria's voice, mocking, cold, almost gleeful. "Stop crying, Noah. Crying is for babies." "Ethan, look at me when I talk to you. You think Daddy loves you? He doesn't even remember you exist." Daniel ripped off his headphones and slammed the laptop shut. His hands were shaking so violently that the glass of whiskey he'd been holding spilled across the desk. Marcus watched silently. "There's more. She documented everything, almost like a diary. She wrote about what she did, why she did it." Daniel looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "Why?" Marcus opened a folder revealing typed pages. "Because she enjoyed it. She called it her project, testing how far she could break a child's spirit before they stopped fighting." For the first time in his life, Daniel Whitmore, the man who had negotiated million-dollar contracts and built skyscrapers, felt powerless. But not for long. He stood, his voice suddenly calm, terrifyingly steady. "Send copies of everything to the police. To every prosecutor, every journalist you know. I don't want her just punished. I want her erased." Marcus nodded. "Understood." That night, as the mansion fell into uneasy silence, Daniel stood by the window overlooking his vast, manicured garden, the same garden where Victoria used to host charity galas. Now it looked like a stage where every lie she'd ever told had played out. He whispered to himself, "You broke my children. Now I'll break your world." And in that quiet vow, spoken into the night, began the war that would soon make the name Victoria Crane, or whatever she called herself, infamous across the country. By the end of that week, Daniel Whitmore's mansion no longer felt like a home. It felt like the headquarters of a silent war. The children played quietly upstairs under Carmen's care, while downstairs, Daniel and Marcus worked late into every night. Papers covered the mahogany desk, printed bank statements, photographs, psychological reports, and a timeline of horrors that stretched across half the wall. Daniel had become a man obsessed, not with revenge alone, but with understanding how a woman could inflict such cold cruelty on innocent children. He needed to know who she truly was, what had shaped her into a monster wearing human skin. Marcus O'Neill had no moral hesitation about digging deeper. With help from 2 cyber investigators and a retired detective friend, he unearthed every layer of Victoria's hidden past. What they discovered went far beyond anything Daniel had imagined. Her name at birth was Melissa Crane, Marcus said, standing beside the desk, his gravelly voice steady. Born in Reno, Nevada, father mechanic, alcoholic, mother and housemaid disappeared when Melissa was 10. At 15, she was arrested for animal cruelty, juvenile records sealed. At 17, charged with abuse while babysitting a neighbor's toddler. Case dismissed after the parents suddenly withdrew their complaint. Daniel's face hardened. They withdrew because she threatened them. Exactly. Marcus pulled another folder from his bag. From 18 to 32, she moved between states. Worked as a nanny, caretaker, even as a nurse assistant under fake references. There's a trail of accusations, neglect, theft, manipulation, but she always vanished before formal charges could stick. It changed her name twice. Daniel sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. She studied me for months, didn't she? Marcus nodded. Everything about you. Your finances, your business holdings, your wife's death, your son's schedules. She was hunting for someone like you, lonely, wealthy, vulnerable. Daniel's voice cracked with disbelief. I thought she saved me after Emily died, but she was just waiting. Marcus's tone was quiet but firm. She's done this before, Daniel. You just caught her before she could go further. You're not her first target, but you'll be her last. That evening, after Marcus left, Daniel poured himself a drink and sat in his study, staring at the family portrait that still hung over the fireplace, the one taken just 6 months earlier. Victoria was smiling flawlessly, her hands resting on the twins' shoulders, her ring glittering under soft light. To the world, she looked like the perfect mother. Daniel couldn't bear to look at it any longer. He lifted the frame, ripped the photograph from inside, and threw it into the flames. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash, just like the illusion of peace she had built. Upstairs, he heard soft footsteps. Ethan stood in the doorway clutching his stuffed elephant. "Daddy?" the boy whispered. "Are you crying?" Daniel wiped his eyes quickly and smiled weakly. "No, buddy, just tired." Ethan walked closer and leaned against his father's knee. "Is the bad lady gone forever?" Daniel looked at the fire, then at his son. "She will be," he said. "Daddy's making sure of it." That same night, Marcus sent Daniel a message, an attachment with dozens of photos and videos pulled from Victoria's secret online drives. It turned out that she hadn't only documented her abuse, she had shared parts of it. Anonymously with a group of people online who seemed to encourage it. It wasn't just her cruelty, it was a network. Daniel stared at the screen, nauseated. Dozens of usernames, coded messages, forums hidden under encrypted layers. Some users posted advice about child discipline experiments, others shared recordings of their own abuse. His blood ran cold. He picked up the phone and called Marcus immediately. "This isn't just about her," Daniel said, his voice shaking with controlled fury. "This is bigger. We're dealing with something organized." Marcus's voice came through the speaker, low and steady. "I know. I've already called a federal contact. We'll hand everything over in the morning." The next day, FBI agents arrived at the estate under full confidentiality orders. Daniel opened his office to them, showing every piece of evidence Marcus had collected, from the photos to Victoria's encrypted diary. What followed was a 12-hour operation, with agents tracing IPs, collecting drives, and cross-referencing online aliases. By nightfall, they confirmed it. Victoria had ties to an online ring that exchanged psychological experiments on children. The discovery turned the private tragedy into a national case, but the most shocking moment came when the lead agent handed Daniel a file. Inside was a photograph, Victoria, years younger, standing with another man and two little girls. "Who are they?" Daniel asked quietly. The agent looked grim. "We believe those are her biological children. They disappeared 12 years ago." "The case was never solved." Daniel's hands trembled. "You mean she—" The agent nodded slowly. "We can't confirm yet, but she's been running from something far darker than money." The realization hit Daniel like ice water. He hadn't just married a liar or a manipulator. He had brought a possible killer into his children's lives. That night, he stood in the twins' room, watching them sleep under the soft glow of a nightlight. He brushed a lock of hair from Ethan's forehead, then knelt beside Noah's bed, listening to the slow, rhythmic breathing of safety restored. But even as he stood there, a new resolve hardened inside him. He no longer wanted just revenge or even justice. He wanted truth, all of it, uncovered, documented, and made public. Not just to save his children, but to make sure no other father ever let a woman like her near their home again. As the house fell silent and moonlight streamed across the floor, Daniel whispered to the shadows, "You thought you could destroy us, Victoria, but you just created something worse, a father who will never stop until your evil is buried forever." Downstairs, his phone buzzed with a new notification, a message from Marcus. "She's resurfaced. Someone saw her near New Haven. She's not running. She's planning something." Daniel stared at the message for a long, dark moment. Then he closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and whispered to himself, "Then it's time to end this." The case exploded into the public eye like a struck match. What had been a private horror in the Whitmore mansion became a headline that wouldn't go away. "Wealthy father exposes madrastra who tortured his twins." The tabloids circled. Talk shows called, cable news anchors read the children's video with practiced sympathy. Daniel found himself dragged across an arena he had never wanted to enter, but there was no backing down now. The truth had teeth, and it would bite back hard. Daniel's legal team expanded. Robert Keller negotiated with prosecutors while coordinating with Marcus and the FBI. They built a layered strategy: criminal charges for child abuse and endangerment, civil suits for damages and restraining orders, and a public relations plan to control the narrative without sensationalizing the boys' trauma. Marcus kept feeding the investigators the mountain of digital evidence, photos, audio files, the encrypted forum data that linked Victoria to the network. Every new file tightened the noose. Victoria, who continued to call herself Victoria Crane when it suited her and use other aliases on the phone, didn't fold. She retaliated like an animal that had been cornered. Her first move was to hire a high-profile defense attorney, a slick litigator named Evelyn Price, famous for turning guilty verdicts into hung juries through theatrical cross-examinations and media pressure. Evelyn's office issued statements calling Daniel a desperate, vengeful father and warning the public against rushing to judgment. Within days, a smear campaign sprouted on social platforms, doctored screenshots, anonymous tip-offs to charity committees that Daniel supported, insinuations that he'd staged the boys' suffering to win sympathy and money. Daniel's team anticipated this. Keller enlisted digital forensics to trace the smears, and Marcus focused on uncovering the source of the doctored material. The first twist arrived when the forensics team linked the primary smear account to a shell company registered under a name Victoria had used years earlier. The name was a breadcrumb. The trail led to a fixer in Boston, a man who specialized in information laundry for wealthy clients. Under pressure, that fixer turned over a ledger, payments, dates, bank transfers. There, in black and white, were deposits paid to him by accounts tied directly to Victoria's credit cards in the months before Daniel discovered the abuse. The smear campaign began to unravel, but Victoria had another darker strategy. She allegedly tried to manipulate the legal system itself by fabricating evidence of parental alienation. Evelyn filed emergency motions alleging Daniel had coached the children, citing an edited audio clip that seemed to show Daniel telling the boys what to say. Marcus's team pushed the clip to a lab. The lab detected professional editing. The timestamps had been altered. Metadata showed splicing. The forensic analyst, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Leah Kim, prepared a report that methodically demolished the defense's claim. The court allowed the expert testimony. Evelyn's opening blow fizzled. While the legal teams fought in courtrooms and email threads, the FBI was working more quietly, methodically. Agents followed the digital breadcrumbs from the encrypted forum and executed search warrants across 3 states. They seized servers, arrested low-level members of the online ring, and, crucially, obtained logs that linked certain usernames to IPs used by Victoria and 2 other women who matched the profiles of previous victims' abusers. One arrest produced a breakthrough. A young man in Ohio, who had once been an enabler to the ring, agreed to flip in exchange for leniency. He provided names, dates, and private messages where Victoria, using a different alias, described her methods in chilling, clinical detail. By the time the preliminary hearings arrived, the prosecution's case was no longer hammered out on hearsay. They had a paper trail, a digital map of abuse and collusion, and the confirmation from witnesses who'd been part of the network. Still, court was grueling. Evelyn sought to humanize Victoria, calling on her prior co-workers to testify about how sweet and attentive she seemed in public, how she'd cried comforting others, how she was the sort of woman who would never harm a child. The strategy aimed to exploit the jury's instinct to reconcile 2 irreconcilable truths: the woman smiling at charity galas and the person who had documented children sobbing in basements. One late afternoon during a recess, Daniel sat alone in a courthouse corridor, staring at the linoleum, feeling the weight of each cross-examination in his bones. He felt exhausted, not merely with the legal battle, but with the moral complexity of exposure. Public trials demand proof, and proof often requires the very witnesses you're trying to protect. He had agonized over whether to allow his son's testimony. Their small faces, brave in their video, would be dragged, questioned, and replayed. In the end, it was Dr. Anna Morales, the child psychologist, who argued it best. The boys needed to tell their truth in a controlled, therapeutic environment. The courtroom needed to hear it to deliver justice. That recommendation carried weight in both his conscience and the courtroom. The state permitted limited testimony under strict safeguards. Cameras were restricted. The courtroom was closed to the public when the boys spoke. A trained forensic interviewer conducted the questioning in the presence of a therapist and the judge. The tapes, later shown to the jury in redacted form, captured the simple, devastating truth. The boys described being locked in the basement, eating spoiled food on the floor, being told their father didn't love them. There were pauses and tears, and moments when the interviewer gently reframed the questions to keep the trauma from overwhelming them. The power of their testimony was not in theatrics, but in the quiet certainty in their voices, 2 small boys naming what had been done to them. Outside, the media narrative shifted irreversibly. Influencers who had been skeptical found themselves apologizing. Social media campaigns calling for leniency for Victoria vanished as more data emerged. Sponsors pulled support from charities that had once partnered with Victoria's public-facing events. Her circle of social allies dwindled. Her parents, who had previously responded with disbelief, were confronted with the mountain of evidence and forced into uneasy silence. Despite the gains, danger lurked. Victoria grew more desperate. At one point during the trial's mid-phase, Marcus intercepted a flurry of messages she sent from jail through a coded contact, a plan to intimidate witnesses and threaten those who had turned against her. The messages were enough to prompt a witness protection maneuver, relocation of a key witness, and additional security detail for Daniel and his immediate family. For a while, the Whitmore estate resembled a guarded compound. Security vans patrolled the perimeter and cameras multiplied. In the middle of this pressure, a different change entered Daniel's life almost unnoticed. He met Dr. Marina Santos. She had been assigned by the court as an expert consultant, a trauma specialist asked to advise on the boys' therapy and provide expert testimony about long-term care for children who'd experienced systematic emotional abuse. Daniel expected a professional relationship only. What he found was a presence that steadied the household. Marina's work was precise and patient. She never pushed. She taught Daniel how to speak to his sons about their experiences without re-traumatizing them, how to rebuild bedtime routines, how to reintroduce small rituals that meant safety, a glass of warm milk, a particular bedtime song, 2 kisses on the forehead. Her courtroom testimony was calm and effective. She explained how children process betrayal and how consistent parental presence can heal formative wounds. Judges listened. Juries leaned in. Daniel watched her in those moments with a new, rueful gratitude, where he had acted out of rage. She spoke of repair as the prosecution's case tightened. Evelyn Price made a final, dramatic tactical pivot. She filed a counterclaim seeking custody rights for Victoria pending trial, arguing that incarceration without custody hearings would be unfair. The motion was sensational. Television anchors called it the audacious legal gambit. The courtroom buzzed with outrage and confusion. The judge, sensing the theatricality, denied the motion the same day, calling it an abusive process given the nature of the charges. The denial landed like a gavel strike on television feeds. Public opinion hardened further against Victoria. Then, the twist no one expected. While the prosecution prepared for the trial, Marcus came to Daniel with evidence that resolved a case puzzling the agents for months: the disappearance of 2 small girls from Melissa's past. Using DNA analysis from preserved photos and a breakthrough from a lab in Baltimore, they matched traces from an old jacket seized in one of Victoria's prior residences to a preserved family sample in a missing persons database. The result was chilling and precise. The girls had likely been placed into the foster system under false names. Their original records were buried by deliberate identity changes orchestrated by Victoria. The revelation added decades to the scale of her crimes. Now the investigation had to answer not only whether she tortured his children, but whether she had stolen and destroyed lives for years. When the jury finally convened, the room was heavy with expectation. Prosecutors presented a consolidated, relentless case: the forensic reports, the digital ledger proving payments for smear campaigns, the server logs tying Victoria to the online forum, the boys' video testimony, Dr. Morales and Dr. Marina's expert reports, and Mare. The verdict came on a quiet Friday morning. The courthouse was packed. Reporters shoulder to shoulder, microphones crowding the steps, camera flashes painting the marble walls white with light. Inside, Daniel Whitmore sat in the front row beside his lawyer, his hands clasped tightly together. Beside him were Carmen and Dr. Marina Santos, her calm presence steadying him like a lighthouse in fog. The jury had deliberated for 3 days. Every hour had felt like a lifetime. The air was thick with that strange silence that comes before justice. Not peace, but tension, as if the whole room was holding its breath. When the jurors filed back in, Daniel looked for clues in their faces. Some looked tired, some looked angry, none looked indifferent. "Madam Foreperson," the judge said. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." The paper rustled. Time slowed. On the charge of aggravated. Child abuse, guilty. On the charge of attempted psychological harm, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy and obstruction, guilty. The words fell one by one like stones into water, sending ripples through the courtroom. Victoria Crane, or Melissa as the world now knew her, stood expressionless. Her once perfect hair was dull, her expensive clothes replaced by the orange uniform of the accused. When the final verdict was read, sentenced to 30 years in federal prison without parole, a gasp moved through the crowd. She turned once toward Daniel, eyes cold and empty, and whispered something no one else heard. But Daniel didn't care anymore. The judge's gavel came down. Justice is served. Outside, the press swarmed. Daniel didn't stop to speak. He lifted Ethan and Noah into his arms as cameras flashed around them. For the first time in months, his sons weren't clinging to him in fear. They were smiling. That evening, back home, the mansion was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. There was laughter echoing from the kitchen, the smell of apple pie baking in the oven, soft music drifting from the living room. Carmen was singing in Spanish while helping the boys set the table. Marina was in the garden, her hands in the soil, planting new roses where Victoria's old sculptures had once stood. Daniel joined her, handing her a watering can. "She's gone," Marina said softly. "It's over." Daniel looked out across the lawn where his sons were chasing each other under the fading light. "No," he said after a long moment. "It's not over. It's just healed." He paused, then smiled faintly. "But I think it's time to start living." Again, years passed. The story of the Whitmore case became a landmark in legal history. The trial that exposed a hidden network of child abusers and led to dozens of arrests nationwide. Daniel never gave interviews again. He donated most of his wealth to a foundation Marina helped him create, the Whitmore Trust for Child Protection, an organization dedicated to helping children recover from trauma and tracking the kind of predators who hid behind polished smiles. Ethan and Noah grew up strong. Ethan became a lawyer like Keller, dedicated to defending vulnerable children. Noah became an artist, painting scenes of sunlight and safety, the very things he once thought didn't exist. Daniel and Marina married quietly in the same courthouse where justice had been served years before. It wasn't a grand affair, just family, a few close friends, and the two boys standing proudly beside them. That night, Daniel wrote one final line in a journal he'd kept since the beginning of it all. "I learned that evil doesn't always wear a mask of darkness. Sometimes it smiles, cooks dinner, kisses your children goodnight. But I also learned that love, real love, heals what cruelty breaks. We didn't just survive her. We built something stronger from the ruins." Outside, the wind rustled through the new rose garden. The stars shimmered above the Whitmore home, quiet and peaceful at last, and somewhere far away, in a small federal prison, Victoria Crane sat alone in her cell, her name erased from every invitation list, her beauty gone, her lies worthless. The world had moved on. Daniel had won the only war that truly mattered, not the one against her, but the one for his sons' hearts. And in that quiet victory, beneath the soft hum of life beginning again, the Whitmore family finally found what they had been searching for all along: peace.